Jack Carter had always found comfort in the quiet of the Montana nights, the kind of silence that wrapped around him like a thick blanket, soothing the remnants of war still echoing in his mind. He'd traded the heat of the desert for the biting cold of the mountains, trying to escape the ghosts that followed him. But tonight something felt off. Something in the air, something indifferent. The wind howled outside his small cabin, rattling the windows and shaking the old wood. It was a storm, one of those summer storms that came out of nowhere, turning the night sky black and pouring rain like a waterfall from the heavens. Jack leaned back in his creaky armchair, the flickering light of a single lamp casting shadows on the walls. The room smelled of pine, the fire burning low in the hearth. But despite the comfort of the surroundings, his mind wouldn't quiet. Then, he heard it. At first he thought it was the wind, but then the sound grew clearer. It wasn't the typical screech of the storm. It was the unmistakable rhythm of hooves against dirt. The clip-clop echoed through the stillness of the night, too steady to be a fluke. Jack froze. It wasn't the sound of a horse galloping through a field or a rider coming home after a long day. No, this was different. This was deliberate. Almost. Like the horse knew exactly where it was going. He stood up, the chair groaning beneath him. He moved to the window and peered out into the rain-soaked darkness. The storm had washed away everything. Visibility was nearly zero. And yet through the sheets of rain he could make out a shape, a horse, a Mustang. Wild and untamed, its coat dark as the night itself. Jack's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just any horse. This was a horse he'd seen only once before. Horse that had wandered through his dreams on more than one occasion. The same Mustang he'd glimpsed in the mountains years ago during his tours. A beast with eyes that seemed to burn with a strange fire. He knew that horse. But how? Why was it? Here now, in the middle of a storm, miles away from any known trail. His fingers hovered over the old rusted rifle leaning against the wall, but he hesitated. The creature wasn't a threat. It wasn't even close to being ordinary. It wasn't a simple stray looking for shelter. Jack could feel it in his gut. This horse, it was leading him somewhere. He grabbed his jacket, not even bothering to put it on fully, and rushed outside into the torrential downpour. The cold, biting rain slapped his face as he made his way across the muddy yard. His boots squelched in the muck as he moved toward the fence line, where the Mustang stood still and watchful. "Where the hell are you going?" Jack muttered under his breath, wiping the rain from his eyes. The Mustang didn't flinch, didn't even turn its head as Jack drew nearer. Instead, it simply waited, as if it knew he would come. Jack was no fool. He had seen strange things in his time as a soldier. He had witnessed the inexplicable, the things that couldn't be explained away with logic or reason. But this was something else entirely. The horse's mane was wild and tangled, its dark eyes gleaming with an intelligence that made Jack feel uneasy. But it wasn't fear that gripped him. No, it was something deeper. Something inside him had stirred, a primal urge to follow. The Mustang snorted as if to say, "Are you coming or not?" Jack took a step forward, his mind spinning. He didn't know why, but he had this gut feeling that something important was about to happen. Something that would change everything. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward even when things get tough? The Mustang stood unwavering in the storm, as though the rain and the wind were nothing more than a faint whisper. Its eyes locked with Jack's, pulling him in like a force stronger than gravity itself. His heart was pounding now, and despite his better judgment, he stepped closer. The animal seemed to know something he didn't. There was a connection, something unspoken that resonated deep within him. Jack reached out a hand, cautiously approaching the Mustang, but it didn't move. The horse was unshaken, as if it had been waiting for him all along. As his fingers brushed its damp coat, a chill ran down his spine. For a fleeting moment, Jack could swear he felt a strange pulse beneath the horse's skin, something almost human. He backed away, shaking his head. No, that was impossible. It was just his imagination playing tricks on him. The memories of Kandahar, the whispers of his past, were never far behind. But this was different. The horse, its eyes, the way it stood there. There was a kind of purpose, and for a moment, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this Mustang was tied to something much larger than any of his old war wounds. Jack took a step back, his boots sinking into the wet earth as he pulled his jacket tighter around him. The wind howled, pushing against him, as if to remind him how small and powerless he was against nature. But the Mustang stood its ground, unyielding. He didn't know how long he stared at it, but when Jack finally turned around to head back to his cabin, he realized the horse wasn't leaving. In fact, it was following him. Not in a chaotic, mindless way. No, it was more like it was guiding him. Jack paused, confused. Should he follow it? Should he return to his warm, quiet cabin and forget about the wild horse in the storm? But then, the memories surged. Memories of his time in Kandahar, the desert heat, the endless sand stretching out in every direction, the faint crackling of radios, the sound of gunfire, the feel of his boots in the dirt. Then there was Mason. Mason Briggs had been Jack's closest friend, his partner in the war. They'd shared everything, the long nights, the grueling missions, and the unspoken bond that came from knowing each other better than anyone else in the world. But Mason had been killed in an ambush, or so Jack had been told. Jack had been the one to find his body or what was left of it on that fateful day, and yet something didn't sit right. Even after all these years, Jack had never truly believed it. The circumstances surrounding Mason's death had always felt off. There were too many unanswered questions, too many things that didn't add up. But who was he to question orders? He was just a soldier, just a cog in the machine. But now, standing in front of the Mustang with the storm raging around him, Jack couldn't ignore the feeling that he was being called to something. Something that was connected to the past he had tried so desperately to leave behind. The horse nudged his shoulder, pulling him from his thoughts. Jack looked at the Mustang, its dark eyes gleaming with an intelligence that unnerved him. This wasn't just some wild animal. It was trying to tell him something. With a deep breath, Jack made his decision. He was going to follow. He turned back, toward the trees, the Mustang moving alongside him. The rain lashed at his face, but he barely noticed. As they ventured deeper into the mountains, Jack felt the pull of something greater, something that was leading him down a path he couldn't yet understand. But he knew one thing for sure. This horse wasn't just guiding him through the storm, it was guiding him to something much more important. His mind wandered back to Kandahar again. The things they had encountered during the war that couldn't be explained by any training manual. The projects they had been part of, the ones that didn't make it into any official reports. Jack had always been told that it was over, that they had left the past behind. But what if it hadn't? What if the war hadn't really ended for them? What if it had followed them, buried in the mountains of Montana, waiting to be uncovered? They trudged through the mud and rain. Jack felt a sinking sensation in his stomach. The Mustang wasn't leading him just to some random spot in the wilderness. No, it was leading him to something much deeper, something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward even when things get tough? The night seemed to stretch on forever, the storm intensifying with every passing minute. The Mustang moved ahead of Jack with purpose, its hooves barely making a sound on the wet earth. Jack followed closely behind, unsure of where the horse was leading him, but feeling an undeniable pull to keep going. The landscape had started to change. The trees, once sparse and scattered, had grown denser. The underbrush thickened, the branches of the trees twisting together like the gnarled fingers of ancient hands. The path, if it could even be called that, was now little more than a narrow trail winding through the dense woods. Jack's boots sank into the mud, each step becoming more difficult, but the Mustang never faltered. It moved like it knew this path by heart. Jack's breath was shallow as he struggled to keep up, the weight of the rain drenching his clothes and weighing on his spirit. He had no idea how far they had traveled, but he could feel the distance, from home in his bones. His mind raced with questions. What had driven him out here? What was this horse's role in all of this? And why did it feel like he was being drawn into something much bigger than he could understand? The further they went, the quieter the world became. The sounds of the storm, the howl of the wind, and the rush of rain all faded into the background. It was almost as if the horse was leading him into another world, a place where the rules of reality no longer applied. The deeper they went into the forest, the more eerie it felt, like something was watching him just beyond his sight. And then Jack saw it. Through the rain, he spotted a strange shape ahead. At first it was nothing more than a shadow in the mist, but as they drew closer, it became clearer. A massive rock formation rose from the earth, its surface jagged and rough, like the remnants of an ancient fortress. The wind howled through the cracks in the rock, sending a shiver down Jack's spine. The Mustang stopped in front of it, turning to look at Jack with those penetrating eyes, as if urging him to approach. Jack hesitated. His heart was pounding. In his chest, every instinct in his body screaming at him to turn back. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just a random rock outcropping. It looked deliberate, like something had been built here. But what could it be? Who could have built it in the middle of nowhere? The Mustang moved forward, stepping closer to the formation, its hooves tapping softly against the stone. Jack watched, spellbound, as the horse stopped in front of what appeared to be a hidden entrance, a narrow gap between two large boulders. The opening was barely noticeable, almost as if it had been concealed on purpose. He swallowed hard. This was no ordinary cave. Jack had seen his fair share of hidden military installations and secret bunkers during his time in the military, but none of them had ever looked like this. None of them had the eerie, forgotten feel that this one had. His heart raced as he wondered if the storm had somehow brought him to a place he was never meant to find. The Mustang nickered softly, pushing, against the entrance with its nose. Jack stared at the gap, then back at the horse. It was as if the creature was telling him to enter, like it was waiting for him to make the next move. Jack had been through too much in his life to be afraid of the unknown. But as he moved toward the entrance, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting inside. Something powerful, something that had been hidden for a long time. He crouched down and slipped into the opening. The space inside was narrow, forcing him to move carefully, but it quickly opened up into a larger chamber. The air inside was cool and damp, but there was something else, a strange, almost metallic scent that filled his nostrils. Jack stepped forward, his eyes straining to adjust to the dim light. The Mustang followed him in, its dark form a silhouette against the shadows. As Jack moved deeper into the cave, he saw markings on the walls, strange symbols that he couldn't quite make out. They weren't like anything he had ever seen, not from any culture he was familiar with. Some of them resembled ancient military insignia, while others were more abstract, like they were from a different time, a different place entirely. The hairs on the back of Jack's neck stood up as he ran his fingers over one of the symbols. It was cold to the touch, as if it had been carved into the stone millennia ago. Suddenly the Mustang let out a sharp whinny, its ears flicking toward the back of the cave. Jack's breath caught in his throat. Something was there. He cautiously moved forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The cave seemed to grow colder with every step he took. The darkness ahead felt thick, oppressive, like something was waiting in the shadows just out of sight. And then, just as he was about to step further into the darkness, a low rumble echoed through the cave. It wasn't the sound of thunder, nor the howling wind. No, this was something different. It was a sound deep in the earth, almost like the very ground beneath him was shifting. Jack froze. The rumble grew louder, and then it stopped. A faint light flickered in the distance. Jack felt his pulse quicken. What the hell was going on here? Why was he being led into this ancient place? And what was the Mustang trying to show him? Hit subscribe. And leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The light flickered again, this time brighter, almost blinding. Jack squinted, trying to make out its source, but the more he focused, the more the shadows seemed to deepen, swallowing the light whole. The Mustang moved silently beside him, its hooves echoing softly against the cave floor, but its body was taut, every muscle primed like a hunter sensing its prey. Jack felt the tension in the air, thick with anticipation. But still he pressed forward. There was no turning back now. The light grew stronger, pulling him toward it with a magnetic force. The deeper Jack moved into the cave, the more he could feel the temperature drop, the dampness creeping under his skin. The further they went, the more surreal everything became. The walls seemed to close in on him, jagged and sharp, but they weren't entirely natural. No, there was an artistry to their formation, like someone or something had carefully constructed this place long ago. Jack's breath became shallow as he rounded a bend in the tunnel, and there, at the end, he finally saw it. A massive stone, for it was old, older than anything Jack had seen in his lifetime. The surface was covered in strange markings, much like those on the walls of the cave. But these symbols were far more intricate, more deliberate. They almost seemed alive, shifting and changing as Jack's eyes moved over them, giving the impression that the door itself was breathing, alive in some way. The Mustang moved forward, its steps growing more deliberate. It came to a stop just in front of the door, its eyes fixed on the markings. Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creeping over him. The door seemed to hold a secret, a long-buried mystery that he wasn't sure he was ready to uncover. He reached out, hesitated, and then placed his hand on the cold, smooth surface of the door. Immediately, a jolt of energy shot through him. His heart skipped a beat and his muscles tensed, as if something within him had been awakened by the touch. The feeling was almost electric, like he had just connected to something ancient, something powerful. His body seemed to hum with it, his skin prickling as if charged with static electricity. The Mustang snorted, its eyes flashing toward Jack, and then it stepped forward, pushing its muzzle against the door. A low rumble echoed through the cave, and the door slowly began to shift. Jack staggered back, his heart pounding in his chest. What was happening? What was this place? Why did it feel so familiar? The door creaked open with a sound that made the hair on the back of Jack's neck stand up. The chamber beyond was bathed in an eerie golden light. There, in the center, stood a large stone pedestal, covered in dust and debris but still standing tall and proud. On it rested an object, a rectangular device, its surface gleaming in the light. It didn't look like anything Jack had ever seen before. The closest comparison he could make was to the high-tech equipment they had used in Kandahar, but this object, it was different. Far beyond anything military-grade, this was something otherworldly. It hummed softly like it was alive, its surface radiating a faint warmth. Jack stepped forward, his curiosity driving him despite the lingering dread that tugged at the edges of his mind. He approached the pedestal slowly, every step measured, until he was standing right in front of the object. He reached out, his fingers trembling as they hovered just above the device. "What is this?" He whispered to no one in particular. The Mustang, which had been silent until now, let out another sharp whinny, its hooves stamping against the stone floor. It was as if the horse was urging him to take it, urging him to understand. But Jack didn't know if he was ready for what this object might mean. Still, his hand hovered closer, and then, as if the device had a will of its own, it seemed to draw his fingers toward it. The moment his skin made contact with the surface, the room was flooded with blinding light. For a moment, everything was disorienting, flashes of light and images swirling together in a chaotic blur. Jack staggered back, his head spinning, unable to make sense of what he was seeing. But then, like a wave crashing over him, it all became clear. The visions hit him like a freight train. He saw himself, not as a soldier, but as someone else, a different version of himself, one he had never known. He was in a darkened room surrounded by men in suits discussing something. The word project kept echoing in his mind. He saw military operations, not from Kandahar, but from a place much further deeper. The desert landscape stretched on forever, but this place wasn't in Afghanistan. It was something far more secretive, a black site, hidden from the world, tucked away in the mountains. And in the heart of it, a mysterious mission, something that wasn't meant to be uncovered. And then he saw Mason standing at the center of it all, not dead as Jack had been told, but alive. He was part of this, part of the mission. But Mason's face, it was different now. There was something dark in his eyes, something that Jack couldn't quite place, a connection between them that went beyond friendship, beyond even loyalty. It was as if they were both part of something larger, something they could never fully escape. Jack gasped as the vision ended, the light around him flickering and fading into the dim glow of the cave. His pulse raced as he stood there, trying to process what he had just experienced. Was this real? Was it just a hallucination, a product of his tortured mind? The Mustang stood beside him, its gaze steady as if it had seen the same thing. Jack stepped back from the pedestal, his hands shaking, his thoughts racing. The object, it was some kind of device, a key to something far larger than he could ever imagine, and it was calling him, pulling him deeper into this mystery. But why? And what did Mason have to do with it? The questions piled up, each more overwhelming than the last. But one thing was certain: Jack was no longer in control of his own path. The Mustang had led him here for a reason, and now it seemed he had no choice but to follow. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward even when things get tough? Jack stood frozen in the dim glow of the cave, his hand still hovering over the strange device on the pedestal. His heart raced, pounding in his ears, and the world around him seemed to hum with an energy he couldn't comprehend. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, to leave this place before whatever dark force lurked here could pull him deeper into its grasp. But there was no turning back now, not after what he had seen. The visions, the connection with Mason, and the eerie certainty that this object held the key to something far greater than just a forgotten military cave, they all weighed heavily on him. It wasn't just a story about a lost friend. It was a story about power, about secrets that had been buried for far too long. The Mustang shifted beside him, its quiet snorts the only sound breaking the silence of the cave. Jack turned to the horse, his mind spinning. It was as if the Mustang knew more than it was letting on. But what could it be? Was this animal more than just a guide? Was it a guardian of some kind, sent to lead him to the truth? "Why here?" Jack whispered, his voice a mix of confusion and desperation. "Why me?" For a long moment the Mustang didn't respond, just stood there with its calm, unblinking gaze. But Jack could feel the weight of its presence, the intensity of its eyes, the way it seemed to be guiding him, not just physically but emotionally, like it was pushing him to confront something deep inside himself, something he wasn't sure he was ready to face. With a deep breath, Jack finally tore his gaze away from the animal and turned back to the pedestal. He needed answers, and if the answers were here, if this device, whatever it was, held the key to unlocking the mysteries of his past, he had to take that step forward. He reached out, fingers trembling, and wrapped his hand around the cool surface of the object. A pulse of energy surged through him. The light in the cave flickered again, and for a moment it felt like time itself had slowed. Jack's chest tightened, as if the very air was thickening, suffocating him. His mind raced, and for an instant he felt himself slip into another memory, one buried so deep that it had been almost forgotten. It was a memory of his time in the military, back before everything had shattered. Before the war, before Mason's betrayal, he was in a briefing room surrounded by his unit, listening to his commanding officer as he laid out a new operation. "Listen up," the officer had said. "We're about to undertake something classified. No one gets to ask questions. We're going into the desert, deep into the mountains. We've got intel on a location, a site that was supposed to be abandoned years ago. But something is there, something we need to secure." Jack had looked around at the faces of his fellow soldiers, each one as confused as he was. But there was an unspoken tension in the room, a sense that they weren't being told the full story. Mason had been there too, his expression unreadable, as always. Jack remembered the strange, unsettling feeling in his gut as he'd watched Mason. There was something about the way Mason had looked at him during that briefing, a strange gleam in his eyes, as if he knew something Jack didn't. And now, as Jack's fingers gripped the object in the cave, the memory came flooding back with vivid clarity. The operation had been a cover. They had been sent to find something, something that was never meant to be discovered. But why had Mason been involved? What had he known? And more importantly, what had happened to him? The device in Jack's hand hummed again, a low vibration that seemed to echo inside his skull. The images from the briefing room vanished, replaced by new ones. This time they were flashes of the cave, the hidden facility, and the strange symbols. That covered its walls. The cave, this place wasn't just a shelter. It was a key, a gateway to something bigger, something hidden for decades. Jack jerked his hand back, his mind reeling. This device, whatever it was, had unlocked a memory, but it had also raised even more questions. The pieces were starting to fit together, but only in fragments. He had to know more. He had to understand what was really going on. The Mustang let out a soft whinny as if sensing Jack's confusion. The horse nudged the pedestal gently, drawing Jack's attention back to the object. It wasn't just an artifact, it was a map. Or at least, that's what it felt like now. The markings. On the device, the symbols weren't random. They were coordinates. Jack wasn't sure how he knew this, but the knowledge seemed to come to him in a rush. These weren't just military codes. They were directions, a guide leading him to another place. He looked at the Mustang, still unsure if the horse could understand what he was thinking, but there was a flicker of recognition in its eyes. The animal knew what to do. Are we meant to follow it? Jack muttered to himself, his voice trembling with the weight of the decision. The path ahead was no longer just about finding Mason. It was about uncovering the truth about what happened in the desert, about what they had all been involved in. The Mustang gave a single nod as if affirming Jack's unspoken question. He took a deep breath, his fingers still tingling from the contact with the device. There was no turning back. Not now. The horse had led him this far, and it was clear that he was on the brink of something far more significant than he had ever imagined. Jack carefully placed the device back on the pedestal, but not without a sense of reverence. There was a time and place for answers, and now wasn't the moment. But soon it would be. He turned to the Mustang, the storm still raging outside the cave, but somehow the world felt quieter, as if a veil had been lifted. He could see the path, now not just through the cave, but through his past, through everything that had led him here, and no matter what it took, Jack knew one thing for sure. He would follow the trail, wherever it led. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The air inside the cave felt different now, charged with an energy Jack couldn't shake. It wasn't just the device he'd found, it was the weight of what was happening around him, the pressure building in his chest as the shadows seemed to deepen. The Mustang stood next to him, its presence oddly comforting yet unsettling. As if the horse too understood the gravity of the situation, Jack took a step back, eyes scanning the cave's walls. Every inch of this place felt like it was hiding something, a secret buried just beneath the surface. The strange symbols on the pedestal had been more than just decoration. The way they glowed when he touched the device, it was like they were alive, waiting for the right person to unlock their meaning. He had to admit it was overwhelming. The years of service, the loss of Mason, the haunting memories from his military days, it was all starting to blend together, creating a story. He wasn't sure he was ready to fully understand, but the Mustang was here. The creature had led him this far, through the thick brush of the forest and into this dark, ancient cave. Now it stood by his side as if ready to take the next step. Jack exhaled slowly, his fingers still tingling from the strange artifact. He knew this wasn't just some random discovery. This was part of a larger narrative, a puzzle that had been built long before his involvement. The question was, what was he supposed to do with the information now that he had it? Where could he go next? He turned his gaze back to the Mustang. The horse seemed to read his thoughts, its ears flicking as it took a step forward, nudging Jack's shoulder gently with its nose. Jack smiled faintly, feeling the weight of the animal's wisdom. Maybe this was the answer he needed. Maybe the path ahead wasn't meant to be figured out all at once. Maybe it was about trusting the journey, even if he couldn't see the full road ahead. His instincts were pulling him in a direction he hadn't anticipated. Forward. The cave had a narrow passageway leading deeper into the earth. Jack had seen it before. Part of the trek into the mountains had involved mapping areas like this, old military installations and storage sites tucked away in forgotten places. But this cave wasn't just forgotten. It felt like it was deliberately hidden, like something or someone had gone to great lengths to keep it concealed. A low rumble echoed through the tunnel, and for a moment Jack thought it was thunder. But no, it was a vibration in the ground beneath his boots. Something was changing. Something was waking up. The Mustang seemed to notice it too. The horse shifted nervously, its hooves clicking against the stone floor. Its ears flicked in every direction, alert and aware. Jack patted the animal's neck, trying to calm it. "We're not leaving yet," Jack muttered, more to himself than to the horse. He wasn't sure why, but he knew there was more to uncover. The device had revealed something to him, but it wasn't enough. He needed to see this through. Carefully, he picked up the device once more, feeling the cool surface in his hands. The symbols on it seemed to pulse with energy, almost as if calling to him. He tucked it into his pack, securing it with a firm pull of the straps. "Let's go," Jack said, voice steady, but tinged with the underlying uncertainty. He wasn't sure if it was courage or desperation that kept him moving, but he took a step forward into the passageway, the Mustang following closely behind. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for the two of them to move side by side. The air grew colder as they ventured deeper, the damp walls closing in around them. Jack's flashlight cut through the darkness, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out, shifting with each step they took. The further they went, the more the vibrations in the ground seemed to intensify. They came to a fork in the tunnel. One path veered to the left, dark and winding, while the other led straight ahead. Jack paused, considering the options. His mind flashed back to the strange symbols he had seen in the cave, and something about the direction straight ahead felt right. He nodded to the Mustang, as if confirming his decision. The horse didn't hesitate. It moved forward, its hooves echoing, softly against the stone, and Jack followed. The path ahead was steeper, the walls growing more jagged and uneven as they descended. The air was heavy now, thick with the scent of old earth and forgotten history. And then, just as they rounded a tight corner, the tunnel opened up into a vast chamber. Jack gasped. The sight before him was nothing short of breathtaking. The cavern stretched out in all directions, the ceiling so high it seemed to vanish into the darkness. But it wasn't the size of the room that took his breath. Away, it was the walls. They were covered in carvings, intricate and ancient, stretching from the floor to the ceiling. Some of the symbols seemed familiar, but others were unlike anything Jack had ever seen. They were precise, like a language that had been lost to time. In the center of the cavern stood a massive stone structure, its purpose unclear. It looked like a monument of some kind, a large slab of rock with more symbols etched into its surface. But what struck Jack most was the feeling that emanated from it, a sense of power, of something ancient and unstoppable. The Mustang stepped forward, its ears flicking as it neared the stone structure. Jack hesitated but followed. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment. This was what he had been led to. The moment his boots touched the ground in front of the structure, another vibration rippled through the cavern. The symbols on the walls seemed to come alive, glowing faintly as if reacting to his presence. Jack felt it then, a deep connection, a pull, as if the room itself was reaching out to him. The Mustang let out a soft whinny, standing beside the structure, its eyes locked onto Jack with an unblinking gaze. Something shifted in the air. Something was about to happen. Jack reached out with trembling hands, his fingers brushing against the cool surface of the stone. And then, without warning, the ground trembled. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The stone beneath Jack's fingertips seemed to hum with life, an energy so raw and ancient that it almost felt like the ground itself was alive. The Mustang stood beside him, its ears flicking back and forth, seemingly attuned to the same pulse of power emanating from the stone structure. Jack's hand trembled as he pressed harder against the surface, as if the stone was calling out to him, urging him to uncover its secrets. The ground shook again, this time more violently. Jack stumbled back, his heart racing in his chest. The air was thick with an electric tension, and for a split second, he wondered if the cave itself was going to collapse. But the Mustang didn't flinch. It stood its ground, its head held high, eyes focused on the stone monument with an almost reverential gaze. Jack's breath came in quick gasps as he steadied himself, wiping the sweat from his brow. This wasn't just a forgotten military installation. It was something far older, far bigger. He could feel it in his bones. Something had been buried here for centuries, and it was waking up. The stone began to glow. It started slowly, a faint light creeping along the edges of the carvings, but then it spread, illuminating the entire chamber with an eerie blue glow. The symbols on the walls pulsed in rhythm with the light, as though they were alive, responding to the presence of the device Jack had found in the cave. The markings on the stone itself seemed to shift and change, as if they were rearranging. Into new patterns, new meanings, Jack took a step back, his pulse quickening. He had no idea what was happening, but he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just an accident. This was meant to happen. He glanced at the Mustang, who was now standing directly in front of the stone structure. The horse's tail flicked, and it took a cautious step forward, its nostrils flaring as if it could smell the change in the air. The bond between them, which had started with a simple trust, now felt deeper, as though they were both part of something much larger than themselves. Suddenly, the ground shook again, more violently this time. A deep rumble echoed through the chamber, and Jack's stomach twisted with unease. He looked up, his eyes scanning the cavern. A crack appeared in the wall, opposite the stone monument, and the sound of grinding stone filled the air as something heavy began to move. Slowly, the stone slab in front of him started to slide open, revealing a hidden passage beyond. Jack's heart raced as he stepped closer. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. The cave was not only a vault for forgotten military secrets, but a gateway to something far more profound, something that had been locked away for centuries. The Mustang snorted, its gaze still fixed on the dark passage that now lay open before them. Jack hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. He didn't know what lay beyond that opening, but every fiber of his being was screaming that it was the next step in the journey he had no choice but to take. As he moved forward, the Mustang followed closely behind, its hooves silent on the stone floor. The path was narrow and the air felt heavier here, colder. The walls seemed to close in, and Jack felt the weight of the centuries pressing down on him. The further they went, the darker it became, until Jack was forced to use his flashlight to light the way. The passage led them down a long corridor, its walls smooth and featureless, except for the occasional symbol carved into the stone. The air was thick with dust and the silence was suffocating. Jack's mind raced, wondering what lay at the end of this tunnel, what truths he would uncover. But the deeper they went, the more it felt like they were walking into the heart of something ancient, something that had been waiting for the right person to awaken it. After what felt like an eternity, the passage opened into a vast underground chamber. This room was unlike anything Jack had ever seen. The walls were covered in intricate geometric patterns, and the ceiling stretched so high it disappeared into shadow. At the center of the room was a massive stone altar, surrounded by a series of large triangular pillars. Each pillar was engraved, with symbols, their meanings lost to time. The air hummed with a low frequency, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. At the far end of the chamber was a large circular door, its surface covered in the same symbols that Jack had seen throughout the cave. It was clear that this place had been constructed with an advanced knowledge of architecture and design, far beyond anything from Jack's time in the military. The door was intricately carved, and there was a strange energy radiating from it, pulling him in like a magnet. Jack approached the altar, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The Mustang stood by his side, its ears flicking in every direction. It was as though the horse could sense the power emanating from the altar, just as Jack could. Jack's hand reached out instinctively, his fingers brushing against the cool stone. The moment his skin made contact, the entire room seemed to react. A soft vibration pulsed through the ground, and the symbols on the walls began to glow with a golden light. The air crackled with energy, and Jack felt his heart race as the chamber seemed to come alive around him. Before he could comprehend what was happening, the circular door at the far end of the room began to move. Slowly it slid open, revealing a small chamber beyond. Inside, Jack could make out the faint silhouette of something, a figure, standing in the center of the room. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if it was a person or something else entirely, but the shape was unmistakable. Whatever it was waiting for him, and Jack knew deep down that this was the moment he had been searching for. The answers, the truth, whatever had been hidden for so long, were just beyond that door. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The air in the chamber grew thick with anticipation as Jack stood at the threshold of the mysterious door. The Mustang shifted nervously beside him, its eyes locked on the darkened room beyond. The figure standing inside, barely visible in the low light, made Jack's pulse quicken. It wasn't a person, not exactly, at least not in the way Jack understood it. No, this was something else. The figure was tall and seemed to shimmer, as if it was made of some kind of translucent material. The outlines of a face were discernible, but there were no real features, only shadows and a faint glowing light that pulsated softly from within. Jack's breath hitched as his mind raced. What was this thing? Was it a person? A guardian? Something far more ancient? The Mustang took a step forward, its hooves clicking softly against the stone floor, breaking the silence in the cavern. Jack felt a strange compulsion to follow, an undeniable pull drawing him into the room. Slowly, cautiously, he moved into the chamber. As soon as he crossed the threshold, the air seemed to change. The temperature dropped even further, and the room felt alive in a way that Jack couldn't describe. The walls shimmered, as if made of liquid light, the strange symbols still glowing around them. Every step he took seemed to echo in the vast emptiness, but it wasn't just the sound. There was a sense of watching, of being observed, that unsettled him. The figure didn't move, but Jack could feel its presence more clearly now. It wasn't a solid being, not in the traditional sense. It was more like a hologram or a projection, but with an undeniable aura of power. Jack felt the weight of centuries pressing down on him, as if this figure had been waiting for someone to come, for someone to make the connection. Without a word, Jack took another step forward, and the Mustang followed, its steps almost silent against the cold stone. As they reached the center of the room, the figure seemed to respond. A soft hum filled the air, and then the figure's outline began to shift. It was no longer a vague silhouette. Now it had more distinct features, sharp angles, almost like the outline of a human face, but with a strange, otherworldly glow. Then it spoke. Its voice wasn't like a human's. It was deeper, reverberating through Jack's bones, as if the words were spoken directly into his mind. You have come for answers, but the question is, are you ready to face the truth? Jack's heart raced. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He didn't know what to say. His mind was a whirlwind of questions, but none of them seemed to make sense. What was this place? Who or what was this being? Why had it been waiting for him? I don't understand, Jack managed to say, his voice shaky. What is this place? What is this thing? The figure seemed to consider his question, its glowing eyes narrowing slightly, almost as if in judgment. You stand in a place forgotten by time, a place hidden from the world, but it is not for you to understand in its entirety, not yet. The voice paused, as if weighing its next words carefully. You have been chosen to unlock what was buried long ago. The path you walk will lead to revelations that will change everything you know. Jack's mind raced. Chosen, buried. The weight of the words hung heavily in the air. He didn't know what to make of it, but he could feel the pull. There was something here, something important, something that could explain so much of what he had been feeling, of what had led him to this cave, to this moment. The Mustang, standing beside Jack, shifted nervously. It seemed to be aware of the gravity of the situation, its eyes locked on the figure with a knowing calmness that Jack couldn't quite place. "Why me?" Jack asked, still struggling to process what was happening. "Why am I here? What do you want from me?" The figure did not respond immediately. Instead, the soft hum in the air deepened, and the chamber seemed to grow even colder, the walls beginning to glow brighter. Jack shivered, a sense of dread creeping up his spine. The answer to his question seemed to be coming, but the weight felt unbearable. "You have seen it," the figure finally said, its voice low and resonating. "The device, the stone, the symbols, they are all part of something much larger than you realize, a network that spans time and space, hidden beneath the world you know." Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he remembered the artifact he had discovered in the cave, the device that had activated the pedestal and the strange symbols. He had thought it was just some relic, maybe a military artifact from a forgotten era. But this, what the figure was saying, it changed everything. It wasn't just an artifact, it was a key to something much more profound, something that had been hidden for centuries. The figure continued. "The device you carry is a link to an ancient force, an energy that predates human history. It was hidden away for a reason. A power, too, great for any one civilization to control, but now it calls to you. And you must choose, will you awaken it fully? Will you accept the consequences of unlocking the truth?" Jack felt a chill run through him as the figure's words sank in. A choice. The weight of that word hung in the air, pressing down on him. Could he even comprehend the consequences of what he was being asked? What had been buried here? What could he possibly be awakening? Before he could process any further, the figure raised its hand, and the glowing symbols on the walls seemed to pulse with a sudden intensity. "You are the key, Jack. The path before you is not just yours alone. There are forces at work beyond your understanding. But know this, what you discover here will change everything. Your past, your future, your very reality." The figure's voice faded, but the hum of energy in the air continued, growing louder, more insistent. The room was vibrating now, as if it too were on the brink of something. Jack stood frozen, his mind a swirl of thoughts, emotions, and an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. The Mustang shifted beside him again, nudging his shoulder with its nose as if urging him to make a decision. It was clear. The time had come. He had no more questions, only the knowledge that he had a choice to make. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward even when things get tough? The room hummed with an almost palpable tension, the air thick with power and mystery. Jack's heartbeat thudded in his ears as the figure's words lingered, pressing on his chest like a weight he couldn't escape. "You are the key." It was a heavy statement, one that threatened to unravel everything Jack thought he knew about himself, about the world. The Mustang shifted beside him, its hooves making soft sounds against the cold stone floor. Jack reached out a hand to steady himself against the smooth surface of the altar, his fingers brushing the ancient carvings again. The symbols seemed to pulse beneath his touch, and for a brief moment, Jack swore he could hear a faint whisper, like a voice coming from the stone itself. What are you supposed to do with this kind of power? Jack's mind was a mess of uncertainty and curiosity. The figure had told him that what lay ahead could change everything. The device, the chamber, the symbols. They were all connected to something far older, something more powerful than he could possibly imagine. But at what cost? "What happens if I unlock this truth?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He knew it was a question that could alter the course of everything, but he had to ask, he had to understand. The figure's glowing form seemed to tilt its head slightly, almost as if considering Jack's question. Then, in a voice that seemed to echo through the very walls of the cave, it spoke again. "The truth is a double-edged sword. It will give you answers, but it will also reveal the darkness that lies beneath. Once you open this door, you will not return to the life you knew. There is no going back." The figure paused, the light flickering briefly as though it was grappling with its own ancient memories. "The power you seek is not of this world. It predates the civilizations that walk it now. It has been kept hidden for a reason, for fear of its corruptive influence. But you are different. You have been chosen because you have the strength to face what is coming." Jack felt a chill creep up his spine as the figure's words echoed in his mind. Chosen. The word felt like a burden. The weight of it settled over him, and the reality of his situation began to hit harder than before. He wasn't just standing in some forgotten cave with ancient military relics. He was at the edge of something much bigger, something that could shake the very foundation of the world. And the Mustang, his constant companion, seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. The horse stood beside him, its body tense as if it understood that Jack was about to make a decision that would change their lives forever. The figure spoke again, its voice softer now, almost sympathetic. The path ahead is fraught with peril. Your mind will be tested, and your body will face trials unlike anything you have ever encountered. But the power can change the course of history. It can destroy, or it can rebuild. Jack swallowed hard, his gaze flickering to the glowing symbols that now illuminated the entire chamber. They felt alive. It was like they were watching him, waiting for him to make his choice. "Is there anyone who's ever tried this before?" Jack asked, trying to gain some sense of the danger ahead. He needed to know if he was the first, or if others had walked this path and failed. The figure didn't immediately answer. Instead, it seemed to shift, its form growing brighter for a moment before returning to its original soft glow. "You are not the first," it finally said, its voice tinged with sorrow. "Others have come before you seeking the same answers, the same power. Some were consumed by it, lost to their own ambition. Others sought to protect the world from what they knew." Jack's throat tightened, consumed by it. That phrase haunted him as he thought about the soldiers who had once occupied this place, the military men and women who had built this structure, who had hidden this power away. Had they known the dangers? Had they foreseen what would happen if it were ever unlocked? "And if I refuse?" Jack asked quietly, his mind spinning with the consequences of both choices. "What if I walk away from all of this? What happens then?" The figure seemed to consider the question for a long moment. "If you walk away, the power will remain dormant. But so will the answers. The world will continue on its course, blind to the truth that lies beneath. The darkness will continue to spread unnoticed until it is too late to stop it." Jack's thoughts were spinning now. The pressure was overwhelming. What if the truth was worse than he could imagine? What if the power he sought wasn't something that could save the world, but something that would destroy it? And yet, there was something inside him, a curiosity, a desire to understand, something that told him that walking away wasn't an option. He had come too far, uncovered too much to turn back now. The answers were within reach, and he couldn't let fear stop him from finding them. Slowly, Jack took a step forward, closer to the altar. The Mustang followed, its hooves clicking softly on the stone. As he approached the glowing symbols, Jack could feel the energy in the room intensify, the air vibrating with power. He didn't know what would happen next, or what the truth would cost him, but he knew he had to see it through. "I'm ready," Jack said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside him. He had made his choice. The figure seemed to nod, its form flickering as if it were somehow acknowledging his decision. Then, it raised its hand toward the altar, and the symbols began to glow brighter than ever before. The air grew heavy with energy, and the ground beneath Jack's feet seemed to tremble. "This is your moment," the figure said softly, its voice now barely a whisper. "Remember, Jack, you are the key, but the door you open may lead to more than you are prepared to face." With those final words, the figure's form began to fade, its light dimming until it was no more than a faint outline. Jack stood in the center of the chamber, his heart pounding, as the last remnants of the figure vanished into the shadows. And then, everything went silent. The glow from the altar began to pulse, slowly at first, then faster, until the entire room was bathed in an otherworldly light. Jack's breath caught in his throat as the stone beneath his feet began to move, revealing something hidden deep inside. The truth was about to be revealed. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward even when things get tough? The pulsing light from the altar enveloped Jack in a glow so bright it seemed to pierce through his very soul. His heart raced, each beat louder than the last, echoing in his ears as he stared at the stone beneath him. The ground trembled, a low rumble beneath his feet as if something ancient was stirring from its slumber. The Mustang shifted nervously beside him, its body tense. Jack reached out instinctively, his hand brushing along its sleek neck, grounding himself in the familiar presence of his trusted companion. Despite the overwhelming power that seemed to radiate from the altar, the Mustang's steady presence was a comfort. And then, with a sudden, shuddering force, the stone beneath Jack cracked. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if the entire cave was anticipating the moment to come. The air was thick with an energy Jack couldn't begin to understand, and he felt his pulse quicken as the altar began to move. At first it was subtle, a low grinding sound like ancient gears shifting, but then the altar split, revealing a hidden passage beneath it. A stairway, long forgotten, spiraled downward into the depths of the earth, leading Jack into the unknown. "Is this it?" Jack murmured under his breath. The air was charged, the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but there was no turning back now. The Mustang whinnied softly, almost as if urging Jack forward. With a final glance at the glowing symbols that had illuminated the room, Jack took his first step down the stairs, his boots scraping against the stone. The moment his foot touched the first step, the light from the altar flickered and died, leaving him in near darkness. But the passage beneath him was lit with an eerie glow, pale, almost sickly, but enough to guide his way. The further Jack descended, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The walls of the narrow passageway seemed to close in on him, the ceiling low enough that he had to duck at times to avoid scraping his head. The air grew colder as he moved deeper into the earth, his breath fogging in the chill. It felt as though he was descending into the very heart of some forgotten malevolent force. Jack could feel the Mustang following him closely behind, its hooves echoing in the silence. He thought about the figure's words, "You are the key." What did it mean? How was he supposed to stop whatever lay ahead? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the stairway opened into a vast chamber. The sight before him made his breath catch in his throat. The chamber was immense, larger than any room Jack had seen in his life. The ceiling was impossibly high, disappearing into shadows above. What truly captured his attention, however, were the walls. They were covered in the same ancient symbols he'd seen on the altar, glowing faintly, their meaning just out of reach. In the center of the room stood a massive stone structure. It was unlike anything Jack had ever seen. Towering over him, it looked almost like a pedestal, but with intricate carvings running along its surface. The carvings were identical to those on the altar, forming an intricate pattern that seemed to pulse with energy. "What is this?" Jack whispered, his voice trembling with both awe and fear. He felt an overwhelming sense of destiny, as though the weight of the world was resting on his shoulders. The Mustang nudged his side, as if sensing Jack's growing unease. But Jack stood still, unable to tear his eyes away from the stone structure. The air around him was thick with the same energy that had flooded the altar room, but now it was more concentrated, more dangerous. With a deep breath, Jack moved toward the structure. His hand brushed along the cold stone, and he felt a sudden, sharp jolt of energy course through him. The symbols on the walls flickered and dimmed, as though they were reacting to his touch. The ground beneath him rumbled again, and Jack steadied, himself bracing for whatever might happen next. Suddenly, the ground beneath him began to shift. The stone pedestal split down the middle, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, there was a small metallic object, gleaming almost impossibly, advanced yet ancient at the same time. Jack's heart skipped a beat. This was the key. The object was unlike anything he'd seen before, its surface smooth and black with intricate etchings that matched the symbols on the walls. It radiated an aura of power, an energy that seemed to tug at his very core, pulling him toward it. He reached out slowly, almost afraid to touch it, but as his fingers brushed the surface of the object, a surge of warmth shot through him. The object hummed in his hand, as if it were alive, responding to his touch. The symbols around the room flared brightly, lighting up in a burst of color, and Jack felt a deep connection to the energy in the chamber. Suddenly, the voice of the figure echoed in his mind again, clearer now than ever before. "You are the key, Jack. This object holds the power to reshape the world. But use it wisely. Its power can be both a blessing and a curse. Jack's mind raced. This was what he had come for. The truth, the power that had been hidden for so long. But as the weight of his discovery settled on him, a new sense of dread crept into his heart. What would happen if he used this power? Would he be able to control it, or would it consume him as it had others before him? As the glowing symbols dimmed, the chamber fell into an eerie silence. The object in Jack's hand seemed to pulse with energy, a reminder that the choice was his. The answers he had sought were here, but they came with a cost. Jack's heart beat faster as he felt the weight of that decision press upon him. The Mustang snorted softly behind him, its presence grounding Jack in this moment of uncertainty. Jack looked at the object in his hand, the ancient power that could change everything. He had to make a choice, use the power and risk everything, or leave it all behind and walk away. The silence was deafening. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The object in Jack's hand felt heavier than anything he had ever held before. The smooth metallic surface pulsed with an eerie energy, as if it was alive and waiting for him to make a move. It seemed to hum with a deep, resonating vibration, the kind that rattles your bones and makes you question what you know about the world. Jack stood there, transfixed by the object. His mind raced with questions. Was this really the power that had been hidden away for centuries? Was this the key to unlocking something greater than himself, or was it a curse that could destroy him and everyone around him? The Mustang, sensing Jack's internal turmoil, nudged him gently. Its warm breath brushed against Jack's shoulder, a silent reminder that he wasn't alone. The connection between them felt stronger now, more profound, as if the Mustang understood the gravity of the decision Jack had to make. The chamber around him seemed to close in, the ancient symbols flickering with a soft light. The energy that had filled the room earlier was now silent, as though waiting for Jack's next move. He could almost hear the ancient voices of those who had come before him, whispering in the back of his mind. "You are the key," the voice had said. "But the power you hold can either save or destroy." Jack's fingers tightened around the object, and the glow from the symbols grew brighter, casting long shadows on the walls. His heart pounded in his chest, the sound filling his ears. The weight of it all pressed down on him. This power, this responsibility, was too much to bear alone. But he wasn't alone. The Mustang stood by him, steady and strong. Jack could feel the animal's unwavering loyalty, its presence grounding him in the moment. He wasn't in this by himself. He closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his thoughts. What had brought him here? What had driven him to this point? His time in the military, the camaraderie he had shared with his brothers in arms, those memories flickered in his mind like flashes of light. His time spent on the front lines, the sacrifices, the bonds forged through blood and fire. But he had seen the darkness that followed too, the scars left behind, the people he had lost. Was he strong enough to wield this power, to make the right choice? Or would he become consumed by it, like so many before him? "You have a choice," the voice whispered again, echoing in his mind. "You can take this power and change the course of history, but be warned, it comes at a cost. The question is not whether you can wield it, but whether you should." The weight of the decision threatened to crush him. Was he ready to take that risk? Could he bear the consequences? The Mustang shifted uneasily beside him, and Jack felt its warmth, its loyalty. It was a reminder that, no matter how overwhelming the situation felt, he had always faced challenges with courage, and that courage had come from the people and things that stood by him. He thought back to the sacrifices his comrades had made. They hadn't died for nothing. They had believed in something greater, something worth fighting for. This power, it had the potential to change everything. But Jack knew that power in the wrong hands could lead to destruction. The chamber around him seemed to hum with anticipation. It was as if the very walls were watching him, waiting for him to make the final decision. The symbols on the walls pulsed in rhythm with his heart. His eyes flicked to the Mustang, whose eyes shone with a knowing light. The bond between them felt unbreakable. Jack inhaled deeply, and With a steady hand, placed the object back into the pedestal. The pulse of energy subsided, and the symbols around the chamber dimmed, as if acknowledging his decision. The weight on his shoulders lightened, but the room was still filled with the heavy silence of consequence. He had made his choice. He wasn't going to take the power for himself, not yet. Instead, he would leave it behind and trust that the right path would present itself in time. The answers would come when he was ready to face them. But as he turned to leave, the Mustang stepped forward, blocking his path. Jack stopped, confused. The horse's eyes glinted, filled with a knowing look, as if urging him to reconsider. "What is it?" Jack murmured, his voice uncertain. The Mustang whinnied softly, a sound filled with both wisdom and warning. And then, as if on instinct, it turned and led Jack to the farthest corner of the chamber, where an ancient mural covered the wall. The painting depicted a figure, tall, strong, and unmistakably human, holding the very object Jack had just put back. The figure in the mural stood alone in a vast barren landscape with the object glowing in its hands. In the background, a storm seemed to be gathering, dark clouds swirling ominously. The figure's eyes were filled with both fear and determination. A shiver ran down Jack's spine as he studied the mural. The image was eerily familiar, as if it had been waiting for him all along. Jack's heart raced. The figure in the painting, was that supposed to be him? Could this be a vision of the future, a warning of the storm to come? The Mustang pawed the ground impatiently, as if urging Jack to act. A sense of urgency gnawed at him, and Jack realized what he had to do. He couldn't turn his back on this responsibility. The power was not just a choice, it was his destiny. And if he didn't take it now, there was no telling what would happen next. He turned back to the pedestal, his hand hovering over the object. With a deep breath, he made his decision. "I won't run from this," he said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "I'll face it head on." The Mustang nickered softly behind him, its presence offering silent support. Slowly, Jack reached down and picked up the object again. This time it didn't hum or pulse with overwhelming energy. Instead, it felt lighter, as if it were waiting for him to make the next move. He had chosen his path. Now the true journey would begin. The cave's atmosphere felt charged, electric, even as Jack gripped the object tightly. It no longer hummed with the same intensity it had moments ago, but its weight in his hand was undeniable. It was as if he had unlocked something, or perhaps awakened something deep inside himself. He could feel his pulse match the rhythm of the pulsing symbols on the wall, as if his very essence was now intertwined with the ancient power before him. The Mustang nudged Jack gently, its warm breath tickling his ear. Jack turned to look at it, and for the first time, he saw something different in the animal's eyes, something more than just the familiar loyalty and trust. It was as if the horse understood the weight of what was happening, as if it knew more than Jack himself did. "Let's move forward," Jack murmured, trying to steady his thoughts. The room still hummed with a strange energy, and his mind raced. He wasn't sure where this journey would lead, but one thing was for sure. He could never go back to the life he had before. There was no going back from the choice he had just made. With a deep breath, Jack moved toward the far side of the chamber. The walls, covered in ancient carvings and symbols, seemed to follow him, the etchings shifting in the dim light. He could feel the power of the place pushing against him, but there was a pull now, an undeniable force that urged him forward, deeper into the heart of the cave. The Mustang followed closely, its hooves echoing softly in the silence. Together, they walked through the vast chamber, and Jack felt something stirring beneath the surface of his thoughts, like a whisper in the back of his mind. He had come here to uncover the secrets of this place, but now it was as if the cave itself was beginning to reveal its mysteries to him. As they continued on, Jack noticed something unusual, a series of doors, each one carved with different symbols lining the walls. They weren't like the stone doors in the previous chambers, but rather ancient wooden doors that had stood the test of time. They were weathered, cracked in places, but still standing strong. One door stood out among the rest. It was larger than the others, intricately carved with a swirling design that resembled the symbols from the altar. Something about it drew Jack in. He approached the door, and as he did, the air around him seemed to grow heavier, more oppressive. The Mustang whinnied softly, as if sensing the change in the atmosphere. Jack paused before the door, his hand hovering just above the wooden surface. There was something about this door, something that made his instincts scream at him to turn back. Yet at the same time he felt an undeniable pull, as if it was calling to him. With a deep breath, Jack pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, the sound echoing through the cave like a warning. On the other side, the room was dark, the air thick, there with dust. But there was something more, something Jack couldn't quite place. A feeling of ancientness, a sense that this place had been untouched for centuries. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light, Jack saw it. An object resting on a pedestal at the center of the room. The object was unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was a sphere glowing faintly with a pale blue light, the surface smooth and seamless. The room seemed to hum with an energy that radiated from the sphere, and Jack could feel it pulling at him, beckoning him closer. "Is this the heart of it all?" Jack whispered to himself. The Mustang stepped forward, its hooves clattering softly on the stone floor as it entered the room. Jack hesitated for a moment, staring at the sphere. His hand tightened around the object he had been carrying, the one he had thought was the key. But now, standing in front of this glowing sphere, he felt uncertain. Could this be the true source of the power? He stepped cautiously toward the pedestal, his gaze locked on the sphere. His instincts told him to be careful, that this was not something to be taken lightly. The energy in the room felt alive, almost sentient, like it was waiting for him to make a decision. The Mustang stopped beside him, standing still but alert. Jack reached out slowly, his fingers brushing the cool surface of the sphere. The moment his skin made contact, a surge of energy shot through him, more intense than anything he had felt before. His vision blurred for a moment, and his heart raced as a flood of images filled his mind. It was as if the sphere was showing him glimpses of the past, present and future, all at once. Jack saw himself in battle, surrounded by the chaos of war, but also standing in quiet moments of peace with the people he had fought alongside. He saw the Mustang, its powerful figure standing beside him, always loyal, always by his side. But there were other images too. Dark visions of destruction, of power misused and lives lost. There were flashes of ancient civilizations, long forgotten, and the rise and fall of empires. The sphere seemed to hold the memories of everything that had come before. Jack staggered back, shaking his head, trying to clear the images from his mind. He gasped for breath, feeling overwhelmed by the sheer weight of what he had just seen. The sphere pulsed with a soft glow, as if acknowledging his reaction. "I wasn't ready for that," Jack murmured, his voice strained. He felt disoriented, as if the world around him had shifted. The Mustang nickered softly, its head tilting as it looked at Jack. The animal seemed to understand, its eyes steady and calm. Jack took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He couldn't let the visions overwhelm him. He had to focus. He reached out again, this time with more determination. He needed answers. He needed to understand what this power was, what it meant, and how it could help him and the world move forward. With a steady hand, Jack touched the sphere once more. Jack's hand remained on the sphere, but the energy it radiated had shifted. What once felt like a chaotic rush of power now hummed with a quiet, almost reverent pulse, as if the sphere had accepted his presence. The rush of visions he had experienced earlier began to subside, leaving behind a lingering feeling of awe and confusion. The Mustang stood by his side, its body tense, ears flicking back and forth. Jack could feel the horse's unease, as if the animal too recognized the gravity of this moment. "Are you seeing this too?" Jack asked softly, more to himself than to the horse. His voice echoed through the room, breaking the silence that had enveloped them. He took a cautious step back from the pedestal, his fingers lingering on the surface of the sphere. The Mustang whinnied lowly, as if acknowledging Jack's unease, but even the horse seemed uncertain, its usual confidence replaced by an unfamiliar wariness. Jack turned his gaze back to the sphere, focusing on the faint blue glow emanating from within. It was mesmerizing in its stillness, but Jack knew that what he had just experienced was no ordinary vision. The images, the flashes of history. They weren't just random, they were connected. They showed him pieces of a puzzle, moments of time and places scattered across centuries, all converging on this very spot. His mind raced with questions. Why had he been chosen to find this place? What was the significance of the sphere? He had already seen the devastation that could come from the power it held. Was he ready to face what lay ahead, to make the decision that would determine the fate of many? Jack looked over his shoulder, toward the tunnel from which they had entered, the chamber. His path forward was unclear, but the Mustang had been a constant companion, leading him through the unknown. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was the start of something even bigger than he had imagined. With a deep breath, he turned. Back to the sphere. The whispers from the cave walls, the ones that had guided him to this point, seemed to return, rising from the stone itself. They weren't words, but fragments of thoughts, of knowledge buried deep in the earth. Jack had learned that much already, that the cave itself was alive with history, with memories that reached out to him. And now, it was time to listen. "I know you're out there," he said quietly. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" For a long moment there was nothing but silence. The Mustang shifted beside him, but even it seemed to be waiting for something. Then, the air around him thickened and a voice, a deep, resonant voice, reached out from the shadows. It wasn't spoken aloud, but Jack could hear it in his mind as clear as day. "You have awakened the power," the voice said, its tone both ancient and urgent. "But with it comes a burden, a choice that will determine the fate of those who come. After you." Jack's heart raced and he instinctively tightened his grip on the sphere. He could feel its energy more clearly now, almost as if it was communicating directly with him. "What choice?" Jack demanded, trying to steady his voice. "What am I supposed to do with this?" The voice seemed to chuckle softly, a low rumble that resonated through the chamber. "You are not the first to ask this question. Many have come before you, seeking answers, seeking power. But the power you hold is not meant for a single person. It must be shared, balanced, or it will destroy everything." Jack swallowed hard, trying to process the magnitude of the words. Destroy everything. The weight of the responsibility was enough to make his knees weak. He wasn't sure he was prepared to bear such a burden. "You must find the others," the voice continued, "the ones who can help you wield this power. Alone you will fall. Together you will change the world." "Who are they?" Jack asked, his voice urgent. "Where are they?" The voice grew quieter, as if retreating back into the cave itself. "They are hidden. They have always been hidden. But the time has come for you to find them." Before Jack could ask more, the voice fell silent. The stillness returned, leaving Jack standing alone in the chamber with nothing but the sphere and the Mustang by his side. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. There was no turning back now. The decision had been made. The sphere, the power, had chosen him. But the journey ahead was far from over. Jack knew that he would have to seek out these others, these mysterious individuals who could help him understand the true nature of the power he had unlocked. He glanced at the Mustang, whose eyes were steady, waiting for Jack to take the next step. There was no fear in the horse's gaze, only the quiet confidence of a companion who had always been by his side. "We have to go," Jack said softly. "There's more to this than we know, and we need to find the others before it's too late." The Mustang nodded as if in agreement, and together they turned to leave the chamber. But as Jack passed through the doorway, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The air around him felt different now, charged with an energy that wasn't there before. The path ahead was unclear, but Jack was certain of one thing: the journey had only just begun. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he and the Mustang navigated the dark, winding tunnels of the cave. The air felt heavier now, laden with anticipation and the weight of the secrets he had uncovered. Every step felt like a countdown to something he wasn't yet prepared for. But he couldn't stop now, not after everything that had happened, not after the voice had spoken to him. He had a purpose, and that purpose was leading him deeper into the unknown. The Mustang trotted beside him, its hooves clicking softly against the stone floor. It was a steady rhythm, a comforting sound in the eerie silence that surrounded them. Jack had always found solace in the presence of the horse, its loyalty, its strength, its unwavering companionship. But now even the Mustang seemed alert. its ears twitching as if it sensed something just beyond their reach. They passed through narrow corridors that twisted like the veins of the earth, leading them into a part of the cave that felt distinctly different. The walls, once rough and uneven, were now smoother, as if carved by hands long forgotten. The faint blue glow of the sphere still flickered in Jack's hand, casting strange shadows along the tunnel. It was a beacon guiding him forward, but also drawing him into a mystery that grew more complicated with every step. The deeper they went, the more Jack began to feel the presence of something ancient, something alive within the cave itself. It wasn't just the power of the sphere, but something else. Something, a subtle hum beneath the ground, a whisper in the air, as if the very earth was watching him, waiting for him to make a decision. "Where do we go now?" Jack muttered, looking ahead into the darkness. He had no answers, only questions. The voice in the cave had told him to find the others, the ones who could help him harness the power he now carried. But where were they? How would he find them? And what did it mean to share the power, as the voice had said? Jack's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden sound of hooves pounding against the stone, a quick, hurried beat. The Mustang, as if sensing something out of the ordinary, halted in its tracks. Its nostrils flared, ears pricked, and it let out a sharp whinny. Jack froze, his breath catching in his throat. Something was wrong. The cave, which had been eerily silent, now seemed to pulse with an unseen energy, as if it had come alive around. Them? He could feel it in his bones, the weight of something about to happen. "What is it, boy?" Jack whispered, his voice tense. He instinctively reached for the weapon at his side, his fingers curling around the familiar handle of his knife. But it wasn't fear that drove him, it was instinct. The feeling that something was watching them, and then he saw it, at the far end of the tunnel. A shadow moved, a figure cloaked in darkness. It wasn't human, but it wasn't something Jack could immediately identify. The shape was tall, slender, and its movements were fluid, almost unnatural. Jack's grip on the knife tightened. The Mustang's stance became even more defensive. Its muscles coiled, ready to react. "Who's there?" Jack called out, his voice echoing off the cave walls. His heart was racing, but he didn't let fear take hold. Not yet. For a moment there was no answer, only the sound of breathing, deep and measured, coming from the shadowy figure. Then, slowly, it stepped forward, revealing a tall, imposing figure, cloaked in a dark, tattered robe. Its face was hidden, beneath a hood, but Jack could sense its presence, feel the intensity of its gaze, even from behind the shadow of the hood. "I've been waiting for you," the figure said, its voice smooth, but cold. Jack didn't move. "Who are you?" His voice was steady despite the growing sense of unease. "I am one of the others," the figure replied cryptically. "The ones who you must seek out, the ones who have been chosen to help you." The Mustang snorted, stamping its hooves in warning, but the figure didn't flinch. It stood motionless, as if it knew that Jack wouldn't make a move without reason. "I don't know what this is," Jack muttered, his mind still reeling from the voice he had heard earlier. "I'm not sure what's going on, but if you're here to help me, show me how. Tell me what this is all about." The figure raised a gloved hand, a faint glow emanating from beneath its hood. "There is much to explain, but words will not suffice. You must experience it. The power you hold is connected to a much larger truth, one that has been hidden for centuries. The answers are here in this cave, but you will need more than strength to understand them." Jack's brow furrowed. "Then why don't you tell me everything now? What's the point of playing games?" The figure took a step forward, and the air seemed to shimmer with a strange energy. "Because the answers will not come from my words alone. They will come when you are ready to face the truth of what lies ahead. You are not the only one carrying the power of the sphere. There are others, other places, other people, and you must learn how to use what you found." Before Jack could respond, the figure turned and began to move down the tunnel. "Wait!" Jack shouted. "Where are you going?" The figure paused, turning slightly. "Follow me, and you will begin to understand. But be warned, there are others who will try to stop you. You're not the only one seeking the power that lies within these walls." With that, the figure disappeared into the shadows of the cave, leaving Jack and the Mustang standing in the dim light of the tunnel. Jack looked at the Mustang, his mind spinning with new questions. There was no time to waste. They had to follow. He didn't know if he could trust the cloaked figure, but something about its words rang true. The sphere wasn't the only source of power, and Jack wasn't the only one who had been chosen. "We need to catch up," Jack said, determination settling over him like a cloak. "Let's go." And with that they set off deeper into the heart of the cave, following the mysterious figure who had claimed to be one of the others. What lay ahead was uncertain, but Jack knew one thing for sure: there was no turning back. Now Jack's breath came in shallow bursts as he and the Mustang moved quickly through the winding tunnels. The mysterious figure had led them deeper into the cave, its movements swift and purposeful. The air around them seemed charged with an unseen energy, as though the walls themselves were aware of their presence. Despite the strange sensation, Jack's mind was focused on one thing: the figure. Who was it really? What did it mean by the others? And what was this power that he and others were supposed to wield together? The questions kept spiraling in his mind, each one adding to the weight of uncertainty that had settled over him. The Mustang trotted beside him, its hooves silent against the stone floor. Jack could feel the animal's tension, as if the horse too was alert to the shifting energy in the cave. Every now and then the Mustang's ears flicked back, a sign that something was not right. The deep hum of the cave had grown louder, resonating through the rock almost like a heartbeat, but it didn't bring comfort. Instead, it brought a sense of foreboding. "Where are we going?" Jack asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The cloaked figure ahead didn't turn around. Instead, it raised one hand, palm outward, as though feeling the pulse of the cave itself. The light from Jack's sphere glowed faintly against the rough stone walls, illuminating patches of ancient carvings and markings, symbols Jack had never seen before. "You'll see soon enough," the figure said, its voice echoing in the quiet cavern. "The answers you seek are ahead, but you must be ready to face what's inside." Jack felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. He hadn't expected this to be easy, but he hadn't anticipated how much of a burden it would feel to follow this mysterious guide into the unknown. His thoughts flashed back to the moment he had first touched the sphere, the rush of power, the visions that had followed. He had known, even then, that his life had changed forever. But this felt different. It felt like they were about to cross a line they couldn't uncross. The figure halted, and Jack nearly bumped into the cloaked back. They had reached another large cavern, this one larger than the last, its walls covered in the same strange symbols. But this time the ground was uneven. Rock formations jutted out at odd angles, and the air was thick with a strange mist. In the center of the cavern stood a large stone altar, surrounded by ancient relics. But it wasn't the altar that caught Jack's attention. It was the figures standing in a circle around it. 4 other people, each cloaked like the one leading Jack, stood in the mist. Their faces were hidden beneath their hoods, and they stood perfectly still like statues, waiting. The cloaked figure in front of Jack turned to face him, raising its hood just enough for Jack to see the glint of eyes, a deep, penetrating gaze that seemed to see through him. "You've found us," the figure said. "Now you must understand what you are a part of." Jack's mind raced. These were the others, the ones the voice had spoken about. But who were they, and what were they doing here in this forgotten part of the cave? The figure gestured toward the others in the circle. "These are the keepers of the power. Each of us has been chosen, like you, to protect the balance of what is contained within these walls." Jack took a hesitant step forward, his hand still gripping the sphere. He could feel its warmth, its energy, pulsing in rhythm with his own heartbeat. But it was no longer just his. He could sense that the others were feeling it too, an invisible connection, drawing them all together. "What do you mean, protect the balance?" Jack asked, his voice steady but laced with uncertainty. "What's inside the cave? What is all of this really about?" The figure tilted its head slightly. "It's more than just a cave, Jack. This place is the heart of an ancient power. It was built long ago to contain something that could change the world. If the power is unleashed, it will either save or destroy everything." Jack's mind raced. The weight of the responsibility was starting to settle over him more heavily now. He wasn't just carrying the power of the sphere, he was part of something far larger, something ancient. The truth was beginning to emerge. but it was still clouded in mystery. Before Jack could ask more, another figure in the circle spoke. "The power you've found is not just for one, it's meant to be shared. If we are to stop the destruction, we must combine our knowledge and abilities. But first we must understand the full extent of what we're dealing with." The voice was soft, but carried an air of authority. Jack turned to see a woman in the circle, her face still hidden. She stepped forward, her presence radiating a quiet strength. "You're the only one who can unlock what's inside the sphere," she said, her voice like a whisper in the cavern. "But you are not meant to do this alone. The others," she gestured to the others in the circle, "will help you. Together we will find the key to the balance." Jack looked around the circle, feeling the weight of their gaze. They were all watching him now, waiting for him to understand something he hadn't yet grasped. "So this is it then?" Jack asked, his voice rising with the gravity of the moment. "I have to work with you, strangers I just met, to control this power?" "We are not strangers," the figure who had led Jack here said. "We are part of something much larger. You may not understand it now, but you will. The power you hold is tied to all of us. Only together can we harness it." For the first time since the voice had spoken to him in the cave, Jack felt a sense of clarity, though still clouded by uncertainty. It wasn't just about him anymore. The power had brought them all together for a reason, and they had to learn to trust each other if they were to survive the trials ahead. Jack took a deep breath, steadying himself. "What do we do next?" The cloaked figure who had been guiding Jack finally reached into its robe and pulled out a worn, weathered map. It unfurled it slowly, revealing a series of symbols that Jack hadn't seen before, yet they seemed oddly familiar. "Next," the figure said, "we find the next piece of the puzzle. The key to the power is scattered across the land. We will search for it together. And when we do, we'll have the answers we seek." The map glowed faintly in the dim light, and Jack realized that the journey was far from over. They had only just begun. The air in the cavern felt heavier now. The presence of the other figures in the circle made Jack acutely aware of how much had changed in such a short period of time. Just days ago, he had been a lonely veteran, battling his inner demons, haunted by memories of war. Now he was standing in the midst of something far greater than himself, a group of strangers who shared the same mysterious burden. The cloaked figures began to move toward the edge of the cavern, where an old wooden door covered in thick vines and moss stood half hidden by the shadows. It was unlike anything Jack had ever seen in the cave. This wasn't a natural formation. It was man-made, or at least it seemed so. The door's surface was engraved with strange runes, much like the ones Jack had seen earlier, but this time they were glowing faintly, pulsing in time with the heartbeat-like hum that echoed through the walls. One of the figures, the woman who had spoken earlier, stepped forward. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the door's ancient iron handle. There was a sense of reverence in her movements, as if she was about to open something far more important than just a door. "This is where it begins," she said, her voice low, as if speaking to herself. "The power of the sphere. The reason. We were chosen. It all leads here." Jack watched in silence as she twisted the handle, the door creaking open with a heavy groan. The room beyond was shrouded in darkness, but Jack could feel the energy radiating from it. It was as though the very earth beneath his feet hummed with anticipation, waiting for something or someone to enter. "What's in there?" Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. The cloaked figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, she motioned for the others to follow, stepping into the darkness. Reluctantly, Jack followed, feeling the weight of the sphere in his hands. It was a constant reminder that he was no longer just Jack the veteran, no longer just someone with a haunted past. He was part of something much larger, something that could change the fate of the world. As they ventured deeper into the chamber, Jack's eyes slowly adjusted to the dim light, and he saw what lay before them. The room was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, but the floor was paved with intricate mosaics, each one depicting scenes of battles and symbols that Jack couldn't quite make sense of. In the center of the room was a massive stone structure, carved with the same glowing runes that adorned the door. It was a pedestal, but not just any pedestal. Atop it, nestled within a stone cradle, was another sphere. this one larger and far more ornate than the one Jack had found. The figure who had led Jack through the cave stepped forward, their voice barely audible over the heavy silence. "This is the source," they said, "the heart of the power we seek to control." Jack stared at the sphere, its surface shimmering with an eerie light. It was almost as if it were calling to him, pulling him closer. But something deep within him told him to resist. This wasn't just another artifact. This was the very thing they had been sent to protect, the force that could either save or destroy everything they had worked for. The woman who had spoken earlier approached the pedestal, her fingers brushing gently against the surface of the stone. She let out a soft sigh as though the weight of the moment was almost too much to bear. "This is what we've been looking for," she whispered. "The true key, the reason we were chosen. If we can control it, we can unlock the power. We need to protect the world." But Jack felt a wave of unease wash over him. He didn't trust it. He didn't trust any of it. The sphere, the figures, the strange energy that seemed to pulse through the cave. It was all too much, too overwhelming. What if they were wrong? What if the power they sought to control was too dangerous, too unpredictable? What happens if we can't control it? Jack asked, his voice tight with apprehension. The woman looked up at him, her eyes shadowed by her hood, but Jack could sense the weight of her answer. "Then we all perish," she said simply. "The power is ancient, and it is not to be taken lightly. We are bound to it just as it is bound to us." Jack felt his stomach tighten. There was no turning back now. The weight of their mission, the responsibility that had been thrust upon him, felt more crushing than ever before. But what could he do? What choice did he have? The cloaked figure who had led him here turned to him, its voice calm but insistent. "You must unlock the power within your sphere. Only then will the connection be complete." Jack felt a pang of doubt. "How do I do that?" The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, it stepped forward, pulling out a small vial filled with a strange liquid. The figure held it out to Jack. "You must drink this," they said. Jack recoiled. "What is it?" "The liquid will activate the sphere," the figure explained. "It will synchronize the two, allowing you to tap into the full extent of the power." Jack hesitated. He didn't know who these people were, and he didn't know if he could trust them. But the fear of failure, the fear of what might happen if they didn't succeed, weighed too heavily on him. He took the vial, his fingers trembling as he uncorked it. The liquid inside was thick and dark, swirling with an unsettling energy. Without a word, he downed it, feeling its warmth spread through his chest. At first, nothing happened. But then, a sharp pain shot through his body, and he collapsed too, his knees gasping for breath. His vision blurred, the world around him spinning. He could feel the sphere in his hands pulsing with a fierce, unrelenting energy. "Hold on!" The woman's voice called out from somewhere far away, but Jack couldn't focus. All he could feel was the power coursing through his veins, filling every inch of his being. It was both terrifying and intoxicating, and for a brief moment Jack thought he might lose himself to it entirely. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the pain stopped. Jack looked up, his breathing ragged, and saw the other figures standing around him, their faces filled with a mixture of awe and fear. The sphere in his hands was glowing brightly now, its light spilling out like liquid fire, illuminating the entire room. The woman who had spoken earlier stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "It's begun," she said quietly. "The power is now in your hands." But Jack didn't know what to feel. He wasn't sure if he had just made a terrible mistake or if he had finally stepped into his destiny. All he knew was that he had just unlocked something far bigger than himself, and there was no turning back now. The light from the sphere pulsed in the dim cavern, illuminating every crevice of the ancient stone walls. Jack felt the warmth of it in his hands, a heat that was both foreign and familiar. It was as though the sphere had always belonged to him, as if it had been waiting for this very moment to reveal its true nature. But with that power came a growing sense of dread, an understanding that the path ahead would demand more from him than he was ready to give. The cloaked figures who had been silent until now began to murmur amongst themselves, their voices low and tense. Jack could barely make out their words, but he could sense their excitement mixed with anxiety. They were waiting for him to act. But he wasn't sure what they wanted. Did they want him to lead them, Did they want him to wield the power they had all come here for? The woman who had guided him into the chamber stepped forward, her eyes narrowing at the glowing sphere in Jack's hands. "You feel it, don't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack nodded slowly, unsure of how to articulate the strange mixture of emotions surging within him. "Yeah," he said, his voice hoarse. "I feel it, but it's overwhelming. I don't know what to do with it." She stepped closer, her presence calming but still filled with an underlying tension. "You don't have to know everything right now," she said. "This power isn't meant to be controlled by one person alone. We are the keepers. But you, Jack, you are the catalyst. The sphere has chosen you, and with it comes a responsibility beyond anything you could have imagined. We need you now more than ever." Jack looked at the glowing sphere, its light flickering in response to her words. "I never asked for this," he said quietly. "I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to find peace, to leave all this behind." The woman smiled softly as if she understood. "That's the burden we all carry. The past never truly leaves us. But this," she gestured to the sphere, "this is a chance for redemption, for you and for the world." Jack clenched his fists around the sphere, feeling the weight of her words sink in. The past haunted him, no matter how far he tried to run. But could this power truly be the key to his redemption? Could it really help him leave behind the nightmares that had followed him from the battlefield? Or was it just another trap? Before he could say anything more, one of the other figures stepped forward, an older man with a gruff voice that carried authority. "We've waited long enough," he said, his eyes fixed on the pedestal with the larger sphere. "The time to act is now. We cannot afford to wait any longer." The woman who had spoken with Jack earlier gave him a sharp look, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Patience, Samuel," she said. "We must be careful. The power in that sphere is volatile. We don't understand it completely." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he turned to Jack. "The time is coming, whether we're ready for it or not. The power is already inside you. We need to tap into it before it's too late." Jack felt the weight of their gazes on him, their expectations pressing, down like an iron shackle. He could feel the power inside the sphere, coiling like a serpent waiting for the right moment to strike. But was he ready? Did he have the strength to face whatever came next? The woman placed a hand on Jack's shoulder, her touch firm but reassuring. "You won't be alone in this," she said softly. "We're in this together." The words should have comforted him, but instead they only added to his sense of isolation. These people, these strangers, they wanted him to lead them, to unlock the power that had been dormant for centuries. But what if he failed? What if the power consumed him, just like it had consumed so many others before him? He took a deep breath and nodded, trying to steady himself. "Okay," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside him. "Let's do it." The woman's eyes softened and she motioned for the others to follow. "This way," she said, leading him toward the pedestal. "We need to place the sphere on the altar where it belongs." Jack hesitated for just a moment before walking forward, the sphere still glowing brightly in his hands. As he stepped closer to the pedestal, the ground beneath his feet seemed to vibrate, as if the very earth was alive, reacting to the energy emanating from the sphere. "Fidi." Woman's voice broke through his thoughts. "Place it on the pedestal, Jack," she said. "It will complete the connection. We'll finally unlock its full potential." Jack's heart raced as he slowly lifted the sphere, feeling its warmth intensify. His hands were shaking now, but he couldn't stop. He had to do this. For better or worse, there was no turning back. He placed the sphere on the pedestal, the light from both spheres merging as if drawn to one another by an invisible force. For a moment, everything went silent. The hum of energy that had been pulsing through the cavern stopped, replaced by an oppressive stillness. Jack's breath caught in his throat and he glanced around, expecting something, anything to happen. Then, the silence was shattered by a sharp crack. The light from the spheres blazed brighter, illuminating the entire cavern in a blinding, white-hot flash. Jack instinctively shielded his eyes, feeling the intense heat from the light sear his skin. The ground beneath him trembled, and he heard. The stones groaned as though the very foundation of the cave was shifting. "Hold on," the woman shouted, her voice strained. "The connection is too powerful. We need to stabilize it." Jack's heart pounded as the light intensified, and he felt a sharp pressure in his chest. It was as though the energy from the spheres was trying to tear him apart, to consume him from the inside out. He clutched the edge of the pedestal, desperate to stay grounded, desperate not to let the power overwhelm him. But it was no use. Pressure built until Jack thought he might collapse under its weight. He could feel the power surging through him, filling every cell in his body, pushing him to his limits. And then, just as he thought he couldn't take any more, everything stopped. The light dimmed. The ground stopped shaking. The oppressive weight lifted from his chest. Jack gasped for air, his body trembling from the exertion. He looked around at the others, their faces pale and wide-eyed, their breaths ragged. They had all felt it, the sheer force of the energy that had been unleashed. The woman stepped forward, her eyes filled with awe. "It's done," she whispered, her voice reverent. "The connection is complete." But Jack wasn't sure what to think. What had just happened? Had they truly unlocked the power they had been searching for, or had they just unleashed something far more dangerous than they could control? One thing was clear. Whatever came next would change everything. The cavern was eerily silent now, save for the soft hum of the spheres on the pedestal. The once blinding light had dimmed to a steady, almost comforting glow, but its presence still filled the room with an overwhelming energy that seemed to hum through the very air. The others stood in a tight circle around Jack, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. Jack could still feel the weight of the power within him, like a living, breathing thing that pulsed through his veins. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, a force that promised to change everything, but at what cost? He had always been a man of action, a soldier who'd fought through the worst the world had to offer, but this was different. This was beyond his understanding, beyond anything he could have prepared for. The woman who had guided him to the chamber, now standing at his side, was the first to speak. Her voice was soft but firm, as if she too was trying to process the enormity of what had just transpired. "You did it," she said, her tone filled with admiration and a trace of disbelief. "You've connected with the power, Jack. You've unlocked something that's been hidden for centuries. We were all waiting for you, but I didn't expect it to happen like this." Jack glanced at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "I didn't do anything," he muttered. I just placed the sphere on the pedestal." "What happened after that?" The woman gave him a somber look. "That's the thing. The power didn't just need you to place the sphere. It needed you to embrace it. You're connected to it now, Jack. You can feel it, can't you?" Jack nodded slowly, his hands still trembling from the aftershock of the energy coursing through him. "Yeah," he said, his voice shaky. "I can feel it, like it's inside me, like it's alive." Another of the cloaked figures, a man with graying hair and a deep voice, stepped forward. His expression was hard to read, but there was a sharpness to his eyes that suggested both caution and determination. "This isn't just a gift, Jack," he said, his voice low. "It's a responsibility. That power you've unlocked, it's more than we understand, and now that it's tied to you, we can't control it. Not fully. You're the key to everything, but you're also the most vulnerable." Jack stared at him, trying to process the words. "Vulnerable? You're saying I'm not in control of it?" The man shook his head. "No, none of us are. Not yet, at least. But you've been chosen whether you want to be or not. And that choice doesn't come without consequences." "Consequences?" Jack repeated, his heart thudding in his chest. "What kind of consequences?" Before the man could respond, the older figure from earlier, Samuel, spoke up. His voice was rough, but there was a certain urgency in it now. "The kind that changed the world, Jack. The kind that will force you to make decisions you aren't ready for. This power, it's not just about us, it's about everything. The fate of the world is now tied to what you do with it. We've waited for this moment, for you to find the sphere, but now that you've unlocked its potential." He trailed off, and Jack could see the weight of the moment settling heavily on his shoulders. He hadn't asked for any of this. He didn't even believe in destiny or fate. He had only come to this cave looking for answers, but now he was faced with something far greater, something that seemed to be beyond his control. The woman stepped closer to Jack, her voice steady, but her eyes filled with concern. "I know this is a lot to take in, Jack, but we need you to understand the gravity of this. The power you hold, it's ancient. It's not just some relic, it's a force that has shaped history. And now that you've awakened it, there are those who will come after you. They'll want that power for themselves." Jack's gut tightened. He had known that there would be risks, but this was something else. He wasn't sure he could handle it. He wasn't sure he even wanted to. "I can't do this," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't ask for this. I'm not some chosen one. I'm just a guy who came here trying to get some peace." The woman gave him a sympathetic look, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "I understand, Jack, but you don't have a choice anymore. We all have a role to play in this. You've already stepped into it, and now you have to decide what kind of person you want to be." Jack looked around at the others, his gaze bouncing from one anxious face to the next. They all seemed to be waiting for something, an answer, a decision, a direction. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, his voice cracking under the pressure. "Then let us help you," the woman said, her eyes softening. "We don't have all the answers either, but together we can figure this out." Jack swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the decision press on him. His life had never been simple, but this was a whole new level of complexity. There was no going back. The power was inside him now. He was no longer just Jack the veteran, he was something else entirely. He turned his gaze back to the two spheres, their glow steady and unyielding. A surge of determination washed over him. He couldn't turn away from this. There was something inside him that knew deep down that this was his fight. It wasn't about the power or the responsibility. It was about protecting those he loved, and maybe even saving the world from whatever threat loomed just beyond the horizon. The woman's voice broke his thoughts. "We've waited long enough. Jack, the world needs you. Are you ready to face what's coming?" Jack took a deep breath and nodded. "I'm not sure I'm ready, but I'll do whatever it takes." Samuel gave him a sharp look, his expression grave. "Then let's move quickly. We don't have much time before the others come looking for you, and they won't be as understanding as we are." Jack nodded, feeling the enormity of what lay ahead. The path was unclear, but one thing was certain. He was no longer just a soldier fighting for survival. He was the key to something far greater. And now, the battle was only beginning. The cold wind swept through the entrance of the cavern, rustling the trees and carrying the scent of the open desert with it. Jack stood at the mouth of the cave, looking out over the vast emptiness that stretched before him. The sky had darkened since they first entered, casting the world in hues of grey and shadow. His thoughts were a whirlwind, 1,000 questions spinning in his head, but the one that stuck was this: what now? The woman who had remained by his side throughout this ordeal stepped forward, her voice low but urgent. "The others will be coming soon. We need to move, Jack. We have to get out of here before they find us." Jack glanced back over his shoulder at the others who had gathered behind him. Samuel, the older man with the deep voice, was already making preparations, checking his gear and speaking in hushed tones with the others. Their faces were drawn, their expressions hard. There was no denying it anymore. They were all in this together, whether they liked it or not. Jack's gaze shifted to the two glowing spheres that still rested on the pedestal. They were silent now, their once blinding light dimming to a steady hum. The energy that had coursed through him earlier seemed to be receding, but he could still feel its presence deep within, like a flickering flame just beneath his skin. It was a constant reminder that his life was no longer his own. He had embraced this power, but it had come with a cost. He looked at the woman again. "How long do we have?" "Not long," she replied, her voice sharp. "The others, those who seek the power for themselves, they've been tracking us. They know something's happened here. We've been too careless." "Who are these people?" Jack asked, his voice heavy with disbelief. He still couldn't quite comprehend the situation, but the urgency in her tone was enough to snap him into action. "They're from the same organization that's been protecting the power for centuries. But not everyone is on our side," she said, glancing back at the others. "Some of them believe the power should be controlled, kept hidden from the world, but others, They want to wield it, to bend it to their will, and they'll stop at nothing to get it. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. This isn't just about ancient relics or treasure anymore. This is about control, about power. We need to get the spheres out of here then, he said, his voice firm, his military instincts kicking in. We can't let them fall into the wrong hands. That's exactly what we're trying to do, Samuel called out from behind him, his face etched with lines of concern. But we can't take them with us without a plan. We need to find a safe place, a hidden location where they can't track us, Jack nodded. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let the power fall into the wrong hands. Not after everything he'd seen, everything he'd felt. The woman stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Her touch was gentle, but it carried a weight that made Jack feel the responsibility pressing even harder on his chest. Jack, she said softly, we've been through a lot together, but what comes next? It's going to be harder. This is only the beginning. The power inside you, it's going to change everything, and it's not just about us anymore. We're part of something bigger now, a battle that's been going on for centuries. Jack nodded, trying to steady the flood of thoughts racing through his mind. The gravity of the situation wasn't lost on him, but it was hard to fully grasp the enormity of what was happening. All he wanted was to make it through this alive. But now there was more at stake. Where do we go? Jack asked, his voice steady. The woman took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the horizon before she answered. There's a place in the mountains, old military bunkers from the Cold War. They were abandoned years ago, but they're hidden enough that no one would think to look for us there. We'll head there, regroup, and figure out our next move. But we have to leave now, Jack. If we wait too long, we'll be surrounded. Jack felt the weight of the decision bearing down on him. There was no time for second guesses or hesitation. They had to move. He turned to face the others. Samuel, the graying man with the deep voice, was already moving to the back of the group, signaling that it was time to go. The others followed, his lead, gathering their gear and making their way toward the exit. Jack glanced at the glowing spheres once more. They seemed so small now, insignificant in the grand scheme of everything that had happened, but deep down, he knew they held the key to everything. If they fell into the wrong hands, the world could be changed forever. As they began to leave the cavern, the woman's voice caught his attention. We don't know what the others will do once they catch up with us, she said, her eyes serious. But we need to be ready for anything. You need to stay strong, Jack. The power inside you, it's going to test you. It'll make you question everything. But you can't let it control you. Jack swallowed hard, his stomach tightening. I won't let it. I'm not some pawn in this game. The woman smiled, but it was a sad smile, one that spoke of long battles and hard lessons learned. I hope that's true, Jack, because if you let it control you, we'll all pay the price. With one last glance at the cave behind them, Jack stepped into the desert, his footsteps steady, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. The world was changing, and he was right at the center of it. As they made their way toward the mountains, the air grew colder, the wind sharper. But Jack couldn't help but feel that something bigger was coming, a storm he couldn't predict. The power inside him was only the beginning, and he had no idea just how far it would take him. The mountains loomed ahead like silent sentinels, their jagged peaks piercing the sky. The wind had picked up, and the temperature had dropped, sending a chill through Jack's bones. The group moved quickly, the urgency of their situation pressing on them with every step. Jack could feel the weight of the spheres in the pack slung across his back, a constant reminder of what they were running from and what they were running toward. It had been a long, tense journey through the desert, but now as they neared the entrance to the old military bunker, the air seemed to hold its breath. The bunker had been abandoned decades ago, but it was the perfect place to hide. Secluded, well fortified, and unknown to the people hunting them, Jack's thoughts were still consumed by the power within him. The energy he had felt earlier hadn't subsided, but it had taken on a new form, a quiet undercurrent that hummed just beneath the surface of his awareness. He didn't fully understand it, but he couldn't ignore it. Every step he took, it seemed to grow stronger, more insistent. The longer he held the spheres, the more he felt connected to something beyond himself. "Jack," the woman said quietly, her voice breaking through his thoughts. "We're almost there. I know it's been a lot to process, but you need to focus now. We have to secure the entrance before they find us." Jack nodded, trying to shake off the feeling of unease settling deep in his chest. "Got it," he replied, his voice steady despite the tension that gripped him. He could hear the distant sound of an engine, likely the vehicles that had been tracking them for days. They were getting closer. Samuel was already ahead, scoping out the perimeter of the bunker. His sharp eyes and military training had proven invaluable since their escape from the cave. He wasn't one for small talk, but Jack could tell he was just as anxious about the upcoming confrontation as everyone else. The group reached the bunker's entrance, a rusted, reinforced door set into the side of the mountain. The area around. It was overgrown with wild brush, but the structure itself was still standing strong, its dark silhouette casting an imposing shadow against the fading light. Jack watched as Samuel and a few of the others began working on the lock, their movements quick and practiced. The woman stood beside him, her gaze scanning the horizon, alert for any sign of movement. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice urgent. "They're close, and when they get here, we'll be outnumbered. We need to make sure we're ready." Jack turned his attention back to the bunker. His mind raced, the weight of everything they had learned pressing heavily on him. The power in the spheres. What did it really mean? What was the purpose behind it all? He had a feeling that they weren't just protecting ancient artifacts. There was something more at stake, something he couldn't fully comprehend yet. The lock clicked open, and the heavy door creaked as it slowly swung inward. The smell of stale air and rust hit them immediately, but there was no time to dwell on it. They had to move fast. Inside, the bunker was dark, its concrete walls lined with old equipment and empty storage shelves. The air was thick with dust, and the only sound was the echo of their footsteps as they made their way deeper into the facility. Jack led the group, his senses heightened as he felt the energy inside him pulse with each step. It was as if the walls of the bunker were alive, vibrating with a strange energy that seemed to respond to his presence. "What is this place?" Jack asked, his voice low. "It's a holding facility," the woman answered. "A place where the power was kept hidden for centuries. It was meant to protect the world from the potential chaos the spheres could cause. But things have changed. The people who want the power are no longer interested in keeping it hidden. They want to control it, use it to reshape the world." Jack paused, taking in her words. The weight of them settled heavily in his chest. He hadn't realized just how deep this went. This wasn't just about the power he felt inside himself. This was about something much larger, something that could change everything if it fell into the wrong hands. "We can't let that happen," Jack said firmly. "No," she agreed, her voice resolute. "We won't. But there's something you need to understand, Jack. The power inside you, it's not just from the spheres, it's part of something much older, something that's been waiting for the right person to unlock it. And that person might be you." Jack's breath caught in his throat. He had suspected it for a while, but hearing it out loud was a different experience altogether. He was connected to this power in a way he couldn't explain, but to hear that he might be the key to unlocking its true potential was both overwhelming and terrifying. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have a choice," she said, her tone soft but firm. "You're the only one who can stop them. The spheres, they're part of you now, and they'll only reveal their full power when you're ready to embrace it." Jack stood still, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always believed that he was just a soldier, someone who followed orders and did his duty, but now he was caught in something much bigger than himself, something he couldn't control or fully understand. Suddenly, a loud noise from outside shattered the silence. The unmistakable sound of boots pounding the earth, followed by the screech of tires on gravel. "They were here." "Get ready," Samuel hissed, his voice sharp. "We don't have much time." Jack turned toward the woman, his eyes meeting hers. There was no turning back now. He had to make a choice. To embrace the power within him, to stand against those who sought to control it, or to run and hide. In that moment, Jack knew what he had to do. "We fight," he said, his voice steady. "We fight until the end." The woman nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and determination. Together they turned to face the darkened corridor ahead, ready for whatever came next. As they made their final preparations, Jack could feel the power within him stir once more. It wasn't just a tool to be used. It was a force, a living, breathing entity that was bound to him. And as the sound of footsteps grew louder, Jack knew that whatever happened next, he would face it head-on. This was the final battle, and he was ready. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?